I was recently looking through the historical records of a meeting that took place in Beijing in 1607, and the scene is almost cinematic. You have Xu Guangqi, a high-ranking scholar official, sitting across from the Italian Jesuit Matteo Ricci. They are hunched over a desk, painstakingly translating Euclid's elements into Chinese. Xu's is visibly electrified. He describes this Western logic as the foundation of all things. He isn't just looking at math. He believes he's looking at the blueprint for a total civilizational upgrade. At that moment, you'd think the spark had finally landed. China had the precise astronomy, the advanced mathematics, and the military tech centuries before the West's Industrial Revolution really moved into gear. It was all right there on the table. It felt like the beginning of a scientific explosion. But then you notice the atmosphere change. As soon as these truths left that private room and entered the gears of the imperial court, something shifted. The telescopes were treated like exotic toys for the palace. The sophisticated clocks became mere ornaments for the elite. The math was real, the collaboration was genuine, yet no revolution followed. The logic of the geometry was accepted, but the logic of questioning authority, the very heart of science, was quietly, systematically sidelined. It's a haunting contradiction. A civilization brilliant enough to master the most complex science of its era, yet structurally built to ensure that science never actually takes root. It's like watching a pilot study the mechanics of flight with obsessive detail, only to realize the hangar doors are permanently welded shut to maintain the stability of the building. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. If science and power occupy the same room, and they finally disagree on what is true, which one is forced to leave?
Wow. Yeah, that is a truly haunting question to start us off. Right. Because for centuries, historians have looked back at that exact moment, that specific missed action in 1607.
Yeah, they use it to explain everything.
Exactly. They use it to explain why the scientific revolution happened in Europe and not in China.
But the thing is...
But if you fast forward, right, from that candlelit room in the Ming Dynasty to where we are sitting today in February 2026.
The dynamic is completely different.
It's totally flipped. The irony is just overwhelming.
And I think that's exactly where we need to begin this deep dive. Because if 1607 was the story of science being sidelined for the sake of political stability, what we are witnessing right now in the mid-2020s is the exact opposite.
A complete inversion.
We're watching this massive civilizational upgrade where the state isn't just tolerating science anymore.
Or treating it like some neat ornament for the emperor's shelf.
Exactly. It is actively constructing the entire stadium for science to play in.
And we really need to emphasize right up front that this is not a stadium designed for copying what already exists.
The old narrative.
Yeah, that old catch-up or copycat narrative that you heard nonstop maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
We really just need to throw that out entirely.
Discard it immediately. Yeah. It is completely outdated. We aren't talking about reverse engineering Western tech.
Oh.
We are talking about a fundamental reality shift where China has propelled itself to the absolute top of the global scientific ladder.
Those hangar doors from the intro, they aren't just open, they've been taken completely off the hinges.
Right. It just means we have a massive amount of ground to cover today.
We're going to look at the hard data first. The numbers from 2024 that genuinely sent shockwaves through the global scientific community.
The earthquake moment.
Exactly. Then we're going to unpack the how. How did they do it so fast? Which brings us to this concept of organized scientific research.
Which sounds a bit dry and bureaucratic at first glance.
It does sound a bit formal.
But it's actually this incredibly fascinating philosophical shift in how a society generates human knowledge.
And finally, we'll dive into the human stories, because you need to see what this looks like on the ground.
From AI engineers in Shenzhen to fusion reactor facilities in Hefei.
Right. But before we get to the fusion reactors, we absolutely have to start with that earthquake. Because for a really long time, there was this very comfortable assumption in the West.
Yeah, the quantity versus quality argument.
Right. The idea was always, well, sure, China produces a massive volume of papers.
But the real science.
Yeah, the real breakthrough, paradigm-shifting Nobel Prize stuff.
That was supposedly still the domain of the US and Europe.
Exactly. The vibe was basically they can manufacture the smartphone, but they couldn't invent the smartphone.
And in 2024, that entire argument just effectively collapsed.
Completely.
We have to look at the Nature Index to understand why.
So for anyone who isn't deep in the academic weeds, let's clarify what the Nature Index actually is.
Important. It's not just a giant tally of every single research paper published anywhere.
It's not padding the stats with random journals.
Oh, It tracks publications in only the 145 most prestigious high-impact journals in the world.
We're talking about the heavy hitters.
The absolute elite. Nature, Science, Cell, Physical Review letters.
These are basically the gatekeepers of human discovery.
The ultimate gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Getting into these journals means surviving a peer review process where the rejection rates often sit above 90 or even 95.
Wow.
You don't get your name in Cell just by tweaking a tiny variable in someone else's old experiment.
You have to find something genuinely new.
You get in because you have significantly advanced your entire field.
So getting published here is undeniable proof of pushing the frontier of human knowledge.
Yes. And here is the reality of what happened. By 2024, China didn't just catch up to the United States in the Nature Index.
They overtook them.
They absolutely overtook them. And not by some razor-thin margin either.
It wasn't a rounding error.
No. China held a 17% advantage over the U.S. in these elite publications.
17%.
We are looking at roughly 37,000 articles from China versus about 31,000 for the U.S.
That is just a staggering gap at the absolute highest tier of science.
Yes.
And honestly, the crazy part to me isn't just the sheer volume of that lead, it's the velocity.
The speed of the shift is terrifying if you weren't paying attention.
Because if you look back just a few years earlier, this wasn't the picture at all.
Not even close. As recently as 2020, the United States was leading China by over 50% in this exact same index.
Just wrap your head around that. In 4 years, they went from being half the size of the U.S. in elite science to being 17% larger.
The growth rate is what has analysts completely stunned.
Yeah, what were the annual growth numbers?
China's output in these top-tier journals was growing at about 18% every single year.
It's 18% annually.
And the U.S. was growing at 2.3%.
It's a vertical wall compared to a gentle slope. That is exactly what I meant in the intro by a civilizational upgrade.
Yeah.
You do not hit 18% annual growth in the hardest sciences on the planet by accident.
No, you don't.
But I do want to push back just a little bit here on behalf of the old narrative.
Sure.
Because even when you present these numbers, you still hear skeptics say, well, maybe they're just gaming the citation metrics.
Right. The paper mill argument.
Yeah, or they say, is it truly impactful research or just incredibly polished incremental work?
It's a fair question to ask historically, because there were issues a decade ago with lower-tier journals.
Right.
But the current data just completely shuts down that skepticism.
So,
when you look at the metric for the top 1% of highly cited papers.
And this means papers that other scientists are heavily referencing to build their own work.
Exactly. It's a pure metric of influence. China has achieved parity or outright superiority there as well.
Volume. It's foundational influence.
These are the papers shaping entire scientific disciplines.
Uh-huh.
And if you break the data down by specific domains, the dominance is even clearer.
Okay, let's get into the specific fields, because science is obviously a massive umbrella term.
So in chemistry, for example, China is producing 2.5 times the output of the U.S.
2.5 times. Wow.
In physical sciences, it's 1.7 times.
Okay.
Material science is another absolute fortress of dominance for them.
So the hard physical sciences are heavily leaning east.
Exactly. Now, the U.S. does still hold a lead in biomedicine.
Which makes sense, given the legacy of the NIH and the massive pharmaceutical industry there.
Right, that ecosystem is deeply entrenched. But even in biomedicine, that gap is closing rapidly.
But in the stuff that builds the physical world...
Engineering, physics, chemistry, the torch has unequivocally passed.
And that's significant because those are the exact disciplines that underpin the future physical economy.
Absolutely. Material science dictates the energy density of your batteries. It dictates the thermal tolerance of your alloys, the atomic structure of your semiconductors.
Chemistry dictates the efficiency of your massive industrial processes.
It is the absolute bedrock of all future technology.
That is such a profound realization to sit with. We are living in a reality where the center of gravity for the sciences that will physically build the 21st century has shifted.
It's not a prediction of what will happen. It is what has already happened.
Right, it's done. But the really big question for me, and what we really need to unpack today, is the mechanics of it.
The how.
Yes, the how. How do you accelerate a nation's scientific apparatus that quickly? Is it just a matter of dumping an ocean of funding onto the universities?
Money is the fuel, sure. But you need a highly engineered engine to burn that fuel efficiently.
Because we've seen plenty of historical examples where countries throw billions at a tech sector and end up with nothing but empty research parks.
Exactly. And this is where we have to introduce that core concept we mentioned earlier, organized scientific research.
Organized scientific research.
Yeah, you see this term constantly in their Ministry of Education strategies and policy frameworks. This is the engine.
It sounds very disciplined, almost industrial in its framing.
It represents a highly deliberate philosophical pivot. Look at the West or just traditional academia historically. We tend to prioritize free-floating research.
Right, the whole ivory tower ideal.
The sciences follows their curiosity down whatever rabbit hole they find interesting.
Which has obviously produced amazing things.
Of course. And that curiosity-driven model still exists in China. But the state has essentially superimposed a powerful new layer of mission-oriented research on top of it.
Mission-oriented.
The explicit goal is to align university research directly with national strategic needs.
So they are actively moving away from the serendipity of discovery and towards the strategy of discovery.
Instead of just asking what is scientifically interesting, the entire system is designed to ask, what does the nation actually need to survive and thrive in the next decade?
And the irony here when you dig into the history of this policy is absolutely wild.
Oh, the Vannevar-Bush connection.
Yes. When Chinese policymakers were drafting the blueprints for this highly organized system, they didn't just look at old Soviet top-down models.
Oh, they looked directly at the United States.
They studied Vannevar-Bush, the American engineer who practically invented the U.S. post-war science boom.
He wrote that famous report, Science, the Endless Frontier, right after World War II.
Exactly. He was the main architect behind the National Science Foundation. He pushed this radical idea that the federal government needed to massively fund basic research at universities to drive national power.
And Chinese strategists studied that text religiously.
They looked at exactly how the U.S. government weaponized funding to lift American universities to the absolute top of the world in the 20th century.
And then they adapted it.
They took the classic American playbook of state-funded basic research and just turbocharged it.
They are running that playbook with a level of centralized coordination that the U.S. frankly hasn't managed in decades.
It's the ultimate historical plot twist.
They realize that the mid-20th century American model was the gold standard for linking state capacity with intellectual output. And they built a modernized 21st century version of it.
So how does this modern version actually manifest in the real world? Right. If I walk onto a university campus in China today, what does organized scientific research look like?
Well, you aren't going to see researchers marching in uniform or anything like that.
Right.
But you are immediately going to see the sheer scale of the investment.
The budgets.
Massive budgets. The Ministry of Education, MOE, has the largest ministerial budget in the entire country.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking over 400 billion yuan dedicated to higher education alone in 2023.
400 billion.
And they channel this through initiatives like the Double First Class University Plan.
Which is designed to do what exactly?
The singular goal is to transform domestic institutions like Tsinghua and Peking University into undeniable global powerhouses.
Right.
Their operational budgets have ballooned by over 50% in a 5-year window.
Just massive capital injection.
Which allows them to recruit the absolute top global talent, buy the most advanced equipment, and build world-class facilities.
But it's not just about building shiny new labs and upgrading the campus cafeterias.
No, the real magic is in the structure. They've established what they call integrated research platforms, or IRPs.
IRPs.
These are not your standard academic labs where a tenured professor and a couple of grad students tinker away on a pet project for 5 years.
Right.
These IRPs are explicitly designed to be combat-ready scientific teams.
Combat-ready. I love that phrasing. But it's very intense for an academic setting. It implies they are targeting something very specific.
It absolutely reflects the urgency of the geopolitics involved.
Yeah.
Let's look at Fudan University as a concrete example of this.
Okay, Fudan.
They have an IRP that is completely focused on choke point technologies.
Choke points meaning areas where the supply chain is vulnerable.
Exactly. And specifically, they are targeting semiconductors.
Which is the biggest friction point on the globe right now.
So Fudan isn't just teaching students the theoretical physics of how a microchip works.
They're actively recruiting elite researchers to work specifically on 3 to 5 nanometer chip processes. Let's just pause on that for a second to let that sink in. 3 to 5 nanometer.
It's the bleeding edge.
It's the absolute bleeding edge. That is the kind of manufacturing process that usually only massive corporate giants like TSMC or Samsung even attempt to wrestle with.
Exactly.
You are dealing with transistors so small that you start running into quantum tunneling effects where electrons just jump the gates. It's incredibly hard physics.
And yet here you have a university platform directly targeting that exact industrial hurdle.
They're working on FinFET and gate-all-around transistor architectures right on campus.
This isn't theoretical physics just for the sake of publishing a paper. This is indigenous innovation designed to solve a critical national vulnerability.
They are framing it as securing the foundation.
Because the logic is simple. If you can't build the advanced chip, you can't train the advanced AI.
And if you can't build the AI, you lose the entire economic future.
Precisely. So the university transforms from a passive observer of science into a highly proactive agent in the national industrial chain.
It's strategic self-reliance woven directly into the university syllabus.
Right.
It perfectly encapsulates that organized aspect of the research.
The organization comes from identifying the problem at a national level, like saying we urgently need indigenous 3-nanometer capabilities.
And the research is the university assembling the team to solve it.
It completely changes how these teams operate. Take Shandong University for another example.
What was they doing?
They run an IRP dedicated to semiconductor materials.
Yeah.
And instead of relying on a single brilliant lone wolf researcher, they use a highly structured team-based approach. They take a massive, complex problem. Say, how do we synthesize this specific high-purity chemical needed for chip fabrication?
Right.
And they break that massive problem into discrete components and assign sub-teams to tackle different angles simultaneously.
So you have a material science team over here, a chemical engineering team over there.
And critically, they have industry leaders sitting directly on the board of the academic platform.
Wow. So the feedback loop between what the lab is discovering and what the factory actually needs to manufacture is practically instantaneous.
That is the entire goal, to completely eliminate the friction between theoretical discovery and commercial application.
Because in a lot of Western systems, that friction is a massive problem. They call it the valley of death.
The valley of death is where brilliant academic ideas die because they can't secure funding to find a commercial application.
Right.
This organized scientific research system is engineered to build a massive bridge right over that valley.
It creates a seamless high-speed pipeline straight from the university chalkboard to the factory floor. This naturally brings us to the human element of all this.
The people actually doing the work.
Because you can draw up all the systems and massive budgets you want, but ultimately, science is performed by human beings. Someone has to sit at the bench and write the code.
And that's where the story of Sarah comes in.
I read this incredible profile of Sarah, a tech lead based down in Shenzhen.
Shenzhen is just the perfect backdrop for this entire conversation.
It's universally recognized as the hardware capital of the world. People used to call it the Silicon Valley of hardware, but honestly, at this point, it just has its own unique gravity.
It is entirely its own ecosystem now.
And Sarah's story brings this high-level organized research concept right down to street level. She works on city brain AI integrations.
AI models that optimize traffic flow grid, energy consumption, municipal infrastructure, all in real time.
And the way she describes her daily reality is so fascinating. She doesn't feel like she's working in an isolated corporate silo.
No, she describes it as being plugged into a national laboratory without walls.
A national laboratory without walls? Because her AI models aren't running in a simulation, they are feeding off real-world live infrastructure immediately.
And the key distinction she highlights is the lack of friction regarding data access.
Right. She says the state initiatives provide the soil.
The soil being the massive integrated data sets. The citywide sensor arrays the physical infrastructure.
And her job as the engineer is simply to provide the seed. The creative algorithmic leap to make sense of all that data.
It's a beautiful analogy, because if you put a researcher like Sarah in many Western contexts, she might spend half her year just fighting for access to fragmented data sets.
Endless meetings with legal teams.
Exactly. Asking a private company for their traffic data. Asking the Department of Transportation for their sensor logs. And constantly hearing, no, that's proprietary, or no, that's out of our jurisdiction.
But in Shenzhen, the institutional framework provides the scale right out of the gate.
It creates an efficiency that enables what she calls compounding progress.
Compounding progress. It's this incredibly powerful flywheel effect. Her work builds on the live data of the city. The city's efficiency improves. That improvement generates even better, cleaner data, which then flows back into her model to improve it further.
It accelerates the pace of innovation dramatically.
And zooming out from Sarah's specific experience, this exact dynamic connects to a much broader policy initiative that I know the global tech community is watching very closely.
You're talking about the 1,000 Schools, 10,000 Companies initiative.
The 1,000 schools, 10,000 companies. The naming conventions for these policies are always so epic. It sounds like a historical military campaign.
It does. But it's actually a highly pragmatic, massive matchmaking exercise organized directly by the state.
Matchmaking between who?
The primary goal is to forcefully pair universities who hold the patents with the commercial companies that can actually manufacture and deploy those patents.
Because that is a huge bottleneck globally. So often, brilliant patents just sit on a shelf in a university library gathering dust.
The classic ivory tower problem again.
The professor gets their tenure based on the paper. The university gets the academic prestige, but the actual physical product never sees the light of day.
Right. And this initiative is a sledgehammer to that ivory tower.
Give me the numbers on this because they are wild.
Based on recent data, this initiative has successfully matched over 1,500 university patent holders with 76,000 different companies.
That is just an unbelievable scale of integration.
It violently accelerates the process of turning academic papers into physical products.
A speed that is incredibly hard to match in a purely market-driven ecosystem where those connections rely on chance networking or expensive technology brokers.
It cranks up the metabolism of the entire national innovation ecosystem.
And it really highlights their overarching strategy: identify the choke points where the nation is vulnerable and then just completely flood the zone with talent funding and industrial connections.
And we actually need to pause and reframe how we talk about these choke points. Well, often in the West, when we see these focused industrial policies or restrictions, we view it as a sign of weakness or defensive isolationism.
We think, oh, they're just closing themselves off from the global market.
Exactly. But if you look at it from the perspective of Sarah in Shenzhen or the top strategists in Beijing, it's not about isolation at all. It's about high-level self-reliance.
High-level self-reliance.
It is not about shutting the door to the outside world. It is about ensuring that your foundational utilities are entirely robust.
The AI, the advanced chips, the high-end chemicals.
Because you cannot collaborate effectively on the global stage if you are fundamentally dependent on someone else for your core technology.
You collaborate best when you are negotiating from a position of absolute strength.
You build the capacity yourself so you can sit at the international table as a true equal.
Which perfectly transitions us to the ultimate international table.
Fusion power.
And this is hands down my favorite part of the entire deep dive.
Yeah.
The story of Dr. Chen in Hefei.
The Artificial Sun Project.
Just calling it the artificial sun gives you chills.
It's an incredible piece of technology.
So Dr. Chen is a lead physicist working at this massive experimental fusion reactor facility, the East Reactor. And reading the descriptions of this place, it sounds like a cathedral of modern engineering.
It's colossal.
Massive metallic structures, superconducting magnets, cooling systems. It is literally designed to mimic the exact physics of a star right here on Earth.
Containing plasma hotter than the solar core.
But the detail that really struck me wasn't just the machinery, it was the scene inside the main control room.
Again, tell us about the control room.
It wasn't just a room full of Chinese scientists working in isolation. Dr. Chen describes standing there watching French engineers and Russian plasma specialists debating data right alongside the Chinese team.
They're all there collaborating on the exact same impossible physics problem.
Pushing the boundaries together. And Dr. Chen posted a reflection on this that genuinely moved me. He said he didn't view this multi-billion-dollar facility as some nationalist triumph or a geopolitical weapon. He called it a common hearth for humanity.
A common hearth. That is such a powerful, evocative image.
Yes.
Because fusion is, without a doubt, the most difficult engineering challenge our species has ever decided to tackle.
We're trying to bottle a star.
Using magnetic fields to contain plasma at over 100 million degrees Celsius to generate a net positive energy output.
And if we actually solve it?
If we solve it, we permanently eliminate energy scarcity for the entire planet. It is a challenge that fundamentally transcends any geopolitical border.
And it seems like the sheer scale of the investment by the state is what makes that collaboration possible.
The way they built the stadium.
Right. Going back to that metaphor.
This completely fractures the narrative that China's push for self-reliance is about hiding from the world.
It's actually a massive paradox to people who hold that old view.
By investing heavily in these monumental facilities, these fusion reactors, these massive particle colliders, China is generating an incredible gravitational pull.
They are attracting the talent.
The absolute best researchers on the planet, regardless of whether they hold a French passport, a Russian one, or an American one, They all want to go where the most advanced science is happening.
Because scientists just want to solve the problem.
Right. They want access to the best equipment. They need resources that are sufficient to actually test their wild theories.
So the state isn't welding the hangar doors shut like they did in that 1607 story with the Emperor's Court.
No. They aren't terrified that the ultimate truth of fusion physics is going to somehow destabilize their authority.
Opposite. In this metaphor, the state has poured endless resources into building the most advanced stadium on the planet.
And because they built it, the ultimate game is being played on their turf.
Which naturally brings the best players to them.
It's the physical manifestation of high-level self-reliance acting as the prerequisite for high-level global contribution.
You have to build the capacity first.
You literally cannot contribute to the global frontier if you do not possess the capacity to reach it yourself.
And what's really fascinating is that this global contribution isn't only happening in these pristine, high-tech, multi-billion-dollar labs in Hefei.
No, it's rippling out.
It's rippling out to places you might not initially expect when you think of advanced science. Which brings us to Samuel.
Yes, the story of Samuel in Nairobi. This perfectly illustrates the open science dimension of this entire rise.
It's the soft power side of the equation. Okay. So Samuel is a local researcher operating in Kenya, and he is dealing with a highly immediate, deeply critical local problem: severe drought.
Right.
His community's agricultural crops are at severe risk of failing. Now, if we rewind just 10 years and Samuel wanted to access high-resolution climate modeling to predict rainfall patterns or analyze deep soil moisture, he would have hit a massive wall.
He would have been completely stuck.
Because that specific tier of satellite data was traditionally locked behind massive institutional paywalls.
Or it was hoarded in a Western university database that required elite credentials to access.
Or it was just straight up classified by a foreign government.
Or, frankly, it was simply far too expensive for a local agricultural NGO in Nairobi to ever afford.
But today, Samuel's reality is totally different. He is sitting in his office in Kenya, accessing real-time, ultra-high-resolution ecological data directly from a Chinese-led satellite platform.
It's a pure application of open science.
Free open access to the data he needs to save his crops. And Samuel describes this platform using a very specific phrase. He calls it a shared sky.
A shared sky. That perfectly encapsulates the profound shift we are seeing in the Belt and Road Initiative.
So, because honestly, when I hear Belt and Road, I immediately picture heavy infrastructure.
Bridges?
Yeah, bridges, deepwater ports, massive railway networks, concrete and steel.
And you aren't wrong. That was the foundational phase, the hardware phase, laying down the physical roads and the power grids.
Right.
But what we're looking at right now and what Samuel's story represents is the critical pivot to the software phase.
The software being the knowledge.
Yes, knowledge exchange, science, technology, and innovation cooperation. There is an actual policy framework called the Belt and Road Science, Technology, and Innovation Cooperation Action Plan. But its impact is incredibly real.
So instead of just exporting the construction crews and the steel beams, they are actively exporting their scientific capacity.
But the absolute crucial nuance here is that it is a two-way street.
It's not just a one-way charity drop.
It's not just altruism. Think about how the AI works. Samuel's local data from Kenya, the real-time ground truth measurements of soil moisture and crop yields under specific drought conditions.
Right, that data goes back into the system.
Yes. That hyper-local data feeds directly back into the massive global climate models running on supercomputers in China.
Which constantly refines and improves the accuracy of the underlying algorithms.
The global model saves Samuel's crops, and Samuel's specific ground data perfects the global model.
It's a completely collaborative ethos.
It effectively transforms the entire globe into a massive, interconnected research laboratory.
And this completely shatters the idea that organized scientific research is somehow insular or closed off.
It is domestically organized and managed very tightly.
But it is entirely globally connected.
It's a network strategy at its core. You construct an incredibly strong, highly funded node in the center.
China.
And then you extend high bandwidth connections to nodes everywhere else on the planet.
And when you layer all these stories together, Samuel's success in Nairobi, the international team at the artificial sun reactor in Hefei, Sarah engineering compounding progress in Shenzhen.
You really start to see the outline of a fundamentally different kind of scientific future.
A future where the East isn't just viewed as the world's factory floor anymore,
but as the world's premier laboratory.
Which inevitably brings us all the way back to that incredibly uncomfortable question we started the show with.
The one haunting Xu Guangqi and Matteo Ricci back in 1607.
Yeah. If science and power occupy the exact same room, and they finally disagree on what is objectively true, which one is forced to leave?
Well, in 1607, the answer was obvious. Science was forced out the door.
Because the core logic of questioning authority was inherently dangerous to the stability of the imperial court.
The emperor simply couldn't have scholars questioning the orbital mechanics of the stars if it meant the populace might start questioning the mandate of heaven.
The stability of the state required the suppression of the inquiry.
But today, standing here in 2026, looking at the sheer volume of this data, looking at the ferocious speed of this civilizational upgrade, the answer to that question is completely different.
The answer for 2026 is that neither of them leaves the room.
They have learned to dance together.
In fact, it seems the state has realized something incredibly profound about the 21st century.
That to remain stable and to project true power in this era, you have to live on the absolute frontier of truth.
You cannot maintain power by suppressing discovery anymore.
You maintain your power by deliberately accelerating discovery faster than anyone else.
The logic of questioning hasn't been sidelined. It has been completely integrated into the very machinery of the state's stability.
Exactly. The stability provides the massive funding, the incredible coordination, the colossal stadium.
And the relentless scientific questioning provides the fuel. They aren't enemies in this system.
They are deeply synergistic partners.
We're looking at a world where those old hangar doors haven't just been unlocked. They have been ripped off their hinges entirely to let the rockets fly out. This is exactly what happens when an entire civilization decides that its foundation isn't just historical tradition, but the highly organized, relentless pursuit of the next great discovery.
It generates a momentum that fundamentally alters the trajectory of human progress. And the rest of the world has to pay attention to it, not with anxiety, but with an equal spirit of relentless curiosity. Because the bar for human achievement has permanently been raised.
The game has fundamentally changed, and we are all watching it happen in real time.
Always.
See you next time.